Thank you once again for joining us. Silver Star recipient William Whorton was both enlisted and officer in the Marines, serving 2 combat tours in Vietnam. A polyglot, he speaks several Vietnamese and Chinese dialects, providing him a deeper understanding of Asian and Southeast Asian cultures. He taught and lectured for over 30 years at Thailand's premier university, Chulalongkorn. He has returned to Vietnam 14 times since the war, seeking and learning from former North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, and South Vietnamese soldiers. Horton has a series of videos on this channel providing his insights into the Vietnam War and regales us with thrilling stories in videos such as Valley of Death, Ah Shaw, The Cowards, Ho Chi Minh's victory strategy, the decisive weapon he employed, and several more. And today, Horton speaks to us about his spiritual experiences through the lens of a combat veteran.
My friends, I'm William S. Whorton, and today I think I'm going to tell you one of the most unusual stories that you will probably ever hear in your life. Because from 1957 to 1959, I was the only white boy in an all-black church in a small Kansas town called Junction City, Kansas. It's at a time, 1957 to 1959. This is before all the civil rights movements were really going out. This is a story of what a real religious journey into a church, into the United States Marine Corps, into infantry combat, into philosophy, and then just keeping into the religion also. Let's start it off by saying this. Let's just go back to, it's the summer of 1950. I think it's around the summer of 1957. And I'm approaching 16 years old. I'm still 15, approaching 16. And it's a Sunday morning in Junction City, Kansas. Junction City is a town of about 16,000, small town. It's an army town. The first infantry division is at Fort Riley, Kansas, which is about 3 or 4 miles away. So anyway, I've been visiting a friend of mine. It's a Sunday morning, and I've been visiting a friend of mine, and I'm walking home by kind of an unfamiliar way, and then I'm walking by a building, a very, very old building, and then all of a sudden, I'm hearing stunning music coming out of the building, and I realize it's a church. And then the music is so powerful and so mesmerizing that it freezes me. And so here I am, I'm frozen, and all of a sudden I find tears coming out of my eyes, and I'm frozen, not really able to move, and I'm mesmerized by this music pouring out of the church. And as I stand there in this kind of state, 2 black gentlemen come out of the church, and then that kind of wakes me up a little bit. And the 2 black gentlemen are dressed as the black church people of that generation were. They were in pure white, cream white coats, trousers, vest, wearing white gloves, very, very distinguished. And one of the gentlemen said, "Young sir, what can we do for you?" Very respectfully, I said, "Well, with your permission, I'd like to stand out here and listen to the music." And they said, "Well, you can listen to the music a lot better inside." And I said, "But I'm not dressed," because at that time I was visiting a friend. I was in, teenager, Kansas teenager, 1957. I was wearing t-shirt, jeans, sneakers, and I said, "But I'm not dressed for church." And they said, "Not a problem." So they escorted me in, and I was the only white member in the whole building. And they sat me down. Several people moved over, and they put me in a pew. And then the music poured back over me again, and I was just mesmerized by the music, and I listened to the sermon. And then after it was over, the pastor, Reverend Peter H. Hamlin, came up to me and shook my hand and said, we were glad to have you as our guest, and if you feel like you'd like to come back, please feel free to come back. So I went home, and then my mother and I talked over everything. I talked to my mother and explained to my mother what had happened, and my mother was quite interested in the whole process. But she put her finger on a very, very key element that I hadn't thought about. She said that you were stopped, and this is an objective, concrete fact. It's a reality. You'd lost your sense of consciousness. You'd lost your sense of self in the music. There was no ego. There was no I. There was no I, me, or my in that entire experience. And she said, that's a very interesting thing. To let my friends out there know how interesting this was is because I had gone from being a kind of believer to being pretty much a complete atheist. I turned atheist when I was 13 years old. Now, my mother and I were kind of confused about religion. We were people that wanted to believe in some kind of universal supreme spirit, God, whatever you want to call it. I'll call it that, because that is more of a neutral term, and that way we don't have to get involved with specific religions or cults or anything else. So let's just say that we were confused. My mother had made me go to church, and she sang in the choir, and I'd gone to church my whole life until I was about 13. And then at the age of 13, I read a book, and the book that I read was called The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. Now, to understand a little something more is the fact that you have to know that my mother and I were incredible readers. In our house, you could not walk around our house from one place to the other without going through stacks of books. In other words, we had books piled up all over the place. I used to love to play hooky going to school just so I could stay home and read. I love to read that much. So at the age of 13, I'd read this book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And at the age of 13, I'm not going to pretend that I understood every aspect of the psychology and the philosophy and, the theological arguments of the book. I'm not going to pretend that. But I did understand enough to know that James's point of view is that as soon as we're born, we have this feeling of we lack something. And the second moment after we're born, we have a desire to chase that which we lack. And one of James's points of view is we all have a religious DNA in us to believe something. And so I understood all that. In other words, it was just a case of like, okay, desire, chasing, lack, and we have this DNA. So some people, because of their temperaments, they become Zen Buddhists. Some people become communists. Some people become Baptists. Some people become Catholics. Some people become whatever, kind of thing. So in other words, there is no objective reality. However, my mother had put her finger on the key point. There was an objective reality because I had been mesmerized. I had lost consciousness. That was a fact. Now, that was interesting to my mother. And it was also interesting to me when we talked it over, because both of us talked about James and we talked about what we experienced and all this kind of thing. So we talked all this over. So we realized something had happened, but to us, it was a conundrum and a mystery. we don't know what had happened, and I wanted to find out what is that. What had happened? So my mother said, if you want to, go back to the church. So next Sunday, I put on my Sunday suit, and I went back to the church. And again, I was greeted very, very politely in a very, very friendly way. And I did that for about 4 months. And then at the end of 4 months, Pastor Hamlin said, it seems like that you really enjoy being with us. And so I said, well, I do. He said, would you like to join us? And I said, well, I'll have to talk that over with my mother. And he said, well, of course. Now, one of the things that we have to understand about Kansas in 1957, 58, and 59 is that there was no formal segregation, but there certainly was social segregation. I think it was 1954 and the Brown versus Topeka or something like that, where integration had to come in. But in Junction City, I started off kindergarten with one of my best friends being a black boy by the name of Leon Shaves. And we were best friends. Later, he died of polio, which was fairly common in that generation before the medication. We were integrated in some ways, but of course, socially, no. In other words, in the movie houses, blacks sat in one place, white people generally sat in another place. I mean, it wasn't formal. It wasn't in dances, in school dances or something like that. No white boy would invite a black girl to dance, and no black girl, a good, nice black girl, danced with a white boy. I mean, it just, those kind of things just didn't happen. But on the other hand, in Kansas, in that generation, Kansans are a strange breed of people. We just don't care about what somebody else does. In other words, we are not an ideological, in-your-face type thing. People, we don't care. In other words, my mother and I talked it over, and we agreed that if I joined the church, there would be a lot of gossip in Junction City, Kansas, about that Horton boy belonging to a black church, but nobody would ever say anything about it to our face. And for me, it never occurred to me that any of my high school classmates or anybody would ever harm me or criticize me or mock me or make fun of me or anything like that for that kind of thing. They'd do it for other things, but they wouldn't do it for that. There was no we talked it over and we agreed that there'd be a lot of gossip, but that nobody would do anything or say anything to us about it because they would see it as personal. In the code of Kansas of that generation, it would be just against the code of conduct. I decided to join the church. So on March the 9th, my baptism says, on March the 9th, 1958, I became a member of the Second Baptist Church, Junction City, Kansas. And I became the only white boy in an all-black church in Junction City, Kansas, formally. So I was baptized. And the baptism was really, really something. I will never forget it as long as I live. They have a pool of water, and the Baptists, of course, you go into the water. And I will never forget the song that they sang as I walked into the water. There were 4 older black ladies escorting me. They were all dressed in white. And then the pastor was waiting for me in the pool. And I had 2 sets of clothes because you're baptized. You go all the way into the water in your baptism. The song that they played was "Wade in the Water."
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's a gonna trouble the water.
And I will never, ever forget that in my life, because I almost passed out again because I was so mesmerized the way the choir was singing Wade in the Water. I'll never forget that as long as I live. Wade in the Water, and then I was baptized, and after that became a member of the church. And then again, Pastor Hamlin came and he said, "It seems like that you really like our music." So he said, would you like to join our choirs? And they had three choirs. One was called the men's chorus, which was, of course, was all men. And then they had a young adult choir, which is a mixture of men and women. And then they had a senior choir, which, of course, senior indicates older. I became a member of the men's chorus and the young adult choir. Now, one of the things that was interesting in that generation is that if you joined the choir, you had to sing your own song. And one of the things that was so funny is, I mean, we had great singers in our choirs and stuff, but we had some that didn't sing very well at all too. But it didn't make any difference. But my singing voice was a horrible croak. But the rule is you had to sing your own song. And you had to sing in front of the whole choirs, and you had to sing it. And we sang our choir was so good, we sang all across the state. So we sang in a number of different churches all across the state. And I had my song. My song was called Heaven So High. And it was heaven so high you can't get over it. It's so low you can't get under it. And it's so wide you can't get around it. You must come in at the door. It was a song where the choir could come in behind. When I started croaking out, they could come in behind me real easy and they'd cover for me. But anyway, we had to do our song. And of course, I was so embarrassed, and I said, I can't do this. But again, you are a member of an all-black church. In this all-black church, if you want to join the choir, you sing your song. And that's the rule. So one of the things that I learned, when you move into a different culture, you obey the rules of that culture. Like it or not, embarrassed or not, I had to get up in front of a whole, the church, and I had to sing my song. And I did on a number of occasions. And it was embarrassing for me, but that's their rule. And if you're going to enter their society, you go by their rules. And that's exactly the way I did it. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. But one of the things that it taught me is that the spiritual is going to be a very, very essential part of my life. Now, the next part of my life is I had to find a profession. And so I decided that at first I thought I was going to go into the United States Army. But the Army just didn't have the spirit. And then I started watching, in that generation, they had all these old TV, or these old TV programs. They were all World War II. And I saw program after program of World War II. And I looked into the eyes of the Marines, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Peleliu, and all those places. And I looked into those eyes, and those eyes had seen some kind of universal, supreme spirit reality. They had seen something that I wanted. I wanted that experience. They had gone into the realm beyond life and death somewhere, and they had seen something, and I wanted to enter that world. Fortunately for me, as I was going through this kind of meditation about where I was going to go with the United States Army or not, John Wayne came to town in the sands of Iwo Jima, and I watched the sands of Iwo Jima 9 times in 2 days. And whenever the Marine Corps hymn came on, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli, when that song came on, I just I had another religious experience. I just had another religious experience when I heard the Marine Corps hymn being played. and watching John Wayne and the Saints of Iwo Jima, that was it for me. And then they had the Marine Corps recruiter come, and he was a star. And so he promised us a 9.5-pound rifle, a 60-pound pack, and a chance to become a man, a Marine, And then I was a gone goose. So at 17, I joined the United States Marine Corps. Then in the Marine Corps, we had another kind of religious experience. Because in the Marine Corps, in boot camp, you learn there is no I, me, or my. There is only us, Marines. We are Marines. You are not an individual. You do not have an individual ego. There is no you. When you address yourself, you are, sir, the private, third person, because you're not an I. And if you say you, the drill instructor would say, are you calling me a female sheep? In other words, EWE. You call me a female sheep? And that was good for a beating. And we got beaten in our boot camp. So, that was good for a beating. That spirit stayed with me. It's still with me today. And then the time comes up to go into combat. One of the things that combat became for me was combat became a religious experience also. I had a number of experiences in infantry combat. I think the key experience I had was this. I remember early in my first tour in Vietnam, we were set up for the night. We were out in the boondocks someplace. It was getting towards sunset. I was walking outside the lines a little bit. And all of a sudden, I smelled this horrible, horrible, horrible odor. Oh, God. And there's only one odor like that in the world, and that's a dead human being. And I thought, well, okay, is it a Marine? Is it Vietnamese? Who is it? So I had to investigate. So I went over and looked. It was a young Vietnamese, and he'd been almost cut in two by a machine gunner that was really, really good at his job. I mean, the guy was cut almost in half by a machine gun. And I was watching a troop of ants, thousands and thousands of red ants in a military formation, marching across his viscera. His insides were now outside, kind of thing. So I was looking at that. As I looked down there, I went into this kind of state of meditation where I saw my own death, and I saw myself laying down there. And as I looked down there, I started laughing because I thought it was funny. Because I'd had all these dreams of glory, and I'm going to get lots of medals, and I'm going to be a hero, and I'm going to get promoted, and all these grand things. And all of a sudden I came to realize that all of this is just it's all total bullshit. And then as I got lost into that, I went deeper and then deeper and deeper. And then everything became completely calm and tranquil, very, very quiet. And I lost all concept of I, me, my, no self. And then I was woken up by my radio man came and said, Lieutenant. And I got woken up again. But this happened to me on a number of occasions in combat. Again, we're dealing with that. This is the conundrum. This is the mystery. Where does this arise? That was always for me the question. Where does this arise? Because it happened to me in the church. It happened to me when I was 15 years old. It happened to me in combat. What is that? It's a mystery. It's a conundrum. And then later, during my second tour in Vietnam, where I got lost in the evil of the war, the morality, the lack of morality that I saw in the profession that I was in, the lack of morality I saw in the world around me. And because I saw the war as basically an evil, corrupt, useless one kind of thing. But the problem is in the evil and the corruption, I saw the beauty and the nobility of my Marines and the soldiers that I fought with in combat. Their sacrifice. They would sacrifice for each other. They would sacrifice their lives for others. There is incredible nobility in war, nobility in performing your duty. And that kind of nobility, in contrast with the evil, the politics and the corruption and everything else, the mendacity, the official mendacity, that was just simply too much for me. It overloaded me. That contrast between the nobility of doing duty and then this corruption and evil, it overwhelmed me. So I had to resign my commission as a captain in the United States Marine Corps, and I had to go study philosophy for 6 years to get some kind of clarity. Fortunately, I worked with 7 great teachers at university, and they all understood that I was not going to be a professional philosopher. They all understood I was there because I had personal problems that I had to solve, and they really, really worked with me. So I thought, they were such great teachers. But after 6 years, they said, okay, we've done everything we can for you intellectually. And at that time, I solved enough of my problems to realize I was okay to go back on active duty again. And thank God, and I will never be able to express my gratitude to the Marine Corps enough for them taking me back into the Marine Corps in January 1975. And I will remind my friends out there, and at that time, the military was going through what they called a reduction in force because they were kicking out thousands and thousands of officers and NCOs. And I wanted to get back in. And then the Marine Corps gave me special permission to come back in as a staff sergeant. I was really, really grateful for that. So I was able to come back in, and then I finished out a great, great Marine Corps career. Being a linguist, I came back in as a linguist. I was an interrogator translator. So that's where my polyglot background came out. I was known fairly well for being a linguist in Vietnamese, French, and some Chinese and stuff like that. So I was able to come back in. And I don't know why, but for some reason, starting at the age of 15, some higher universal, I don't know what it is, it's inside me, inside my soul, gave me these moments. Now, I don't know where this comes from. I make no predictions about it one way or another. I claim to know nothing about the divine, the supreme absolute, or anything else. But what I'm on right now is what I'm trying to do is I am trying to chip away at my own ego bit by bit by bit to where once that's gone, there will be no more illusionary doer. In other words, when you live in the world of the ego, what I've understood is this. Out of all my experiences in combat and my experiences in the church, is that when you are living in the world of where there is an I, this I becomes attached to so many different things through the senses and through everything else. And then we live in this world of delusion. But when we can get beyond that and we open up ourselves to the idea of where the real doer is that which is giving you that power to go into this other realm. It's an opening. It's an opening into another realm. And I've experienced that. See, I was lucky. At 15, I was standing outside the doors of that church. And there was that opening that was given to me. That opening was given to me, and I was able to understand that there is a doer beyond my ego that is allowing myself to get in touch with something that is the universe, that is the thing that we are connected with. In other words, we're born, we come from an intangible, formless realm that we know nothing about. We take on a body. This body changes through time, grows up, and now at my age, at 83, it's disintegrating, decaying. I'm prepared to go back into what we call death, but there's not death. I understand this. There is a that out there. I came from a that, a formless, intangible that. I became a body. And then at the moment of death, I will go back to the that gave rise to me. I still don't know what that is. And I'm hoping at the age of 83 that I'll get further down the road to where I will understand more about the that. Now, in preparation for that, I've spent 24 years in Sanskrit probing that idea, and it has really been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful experience. Because as you open up more, as you lose more and more of your I, me, my, you become closer into the that gave rise to everything in the universe, the that which is eternal, boundless, timeless, everything.